Yo, welcome back. Yes, we're picking up with the Aramon tetralogy or something. I don't know. Someone said it was 4 episodes somewhere. I was looking somewhere. Anyway, so we'll find out. But this one, we pick up a year later. No freaking joke. Yep, whole year later. We get a quick recap. And then Joe is at Richie's grave, which is still in Paris, and he's still hanging out there, and he's like talking to Richie about everything that's happened and whatnot. And then Duncan's there, and he's like, "Hey man, you're gonna help me fight the devil." And Joe's like, "I don't believe it. I can't believe you're here. Something, something. I can't believe you were possessed. Blah 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 blah. I can't do it." And Duncan's like, "Well, I need your help. I need you and the Watchers, and yada yada yada." And then they break apart, and then while Duncan's like meandering about, this girl like jumps into the river, and so he goes to save her. Right. And then Joe decides he's going to help Duncan. So then he comes up and tells him, like, "I don't believe in this crazy nonsense and demons and whatnot, but I believe in you." And then they chit chat about how Joe found that there was like another assistant to this guy that she's around, and her name's like Sophie Barnes. Sophie Barnes is the lady he rescued. So Duncan's like, "Oh my gosh, right? It's a trick. What's the chances, right?" And so he goes to track her down and runs into like her little brother, who's a total a-hole. And he's like, "She's not here. Leave her alone, blah, blah, blah." And so Duncan goes to go, but then she's there and they have a conversation. And then we find out that she is dun, dun, dun. She drowned in the river, apparently. Right. And so then she starts freaking out after Duncan leaves, and she hugs her brother because like this white-haired guy or this blonde-haired guy shows up and starts telling her that she's dead and that she's in the morgue and all this stuff. And so she races over to the morgue. And meanwhile, Duncan also goes to the morgue because he hears from Joe that she's dead. And also, Joe found out that like all the research that was done on Aramon at this place has been burnt down, right? Has been destroyed, and no one's seen Sophie in a while. And so he's the one he finds out that Sophie's supposed to be dead. And so he tells Duncan. So Duncan goes to the morgue. And so when Sophie gets to the morgue, and the whole time Aramon's playing like magic tricks on her, they run into each other, and then he's like, "Hey, and then, they see the dead body in the morgue, and then it's her, and it's a crazy thing. And so she runs out, gets in the car with Aramon, and he drives her to like a park. And there they have a chat about how she's alive, but only because he brought her back to life because she died, and that if she wants to stay alive, she has to kill Duncan because there's a whole thing with her and Duncan. And then at some point, Aramon's like in the bars with Duncan, and he's like taunting him, and we find out Duncan for the whole year spent like all this time in like a monastery training his mind and training his heart so that he could like be at one and avoid all the confusion and craziness from Aramon. Like, it's a lot of crazy nonsense. Anyway, and so then while they're at the park, Sophie and Aramon, he points out that her brother is very violent, and then he's like fighting with some guy, and he's like, "I'm gonna make this guy a school shooter. If you don't, you're gonna die, and then he's gonna be punished, and he's gonna end up in jail, and all these bad things are gonna happen." And she's like, "No, no, no." So she goes to meet up with Duncan at this bridge, and she's like, "He wants me to kill you, and I can't do it, and yada yada." And then the brother shows up and shoots Duncan in the back, and then he goes up with a sword to cut his head off while he's on the ground. And then Sophie's like, "I can't let you do that." And so she jumps back in the river to die, and then the brother freaks out, and Duncan is like patting his back, and why did she do that? What happened? He's like, "She did it because she loved you." All right. Meanwhile, while this is all going on, Joe is gathering as much information about this symbol, about the color red, about Aramon that he possibly can. And then at the very end of this episode, which is like part 2 of the Aramon saga, they're sitting around and they find all these symbols, and they're like, because she doesn't have like any information. She says some cryptic bullshit. I can't remember what she said exactly. Something about something that he's like, maybe I can use that to fight Aramon. And then they find like all these symbols from like Set and all this other stuff, and they're like, we can use this. And that wraps up episode 1 of season 6, which starts off in a real banger. All right, so I know I said tetralogy. That's my bad. I read that somewhere. Maybe I hallucinated it. But we're going to wrap up the Aramon trilogy here with the episode Armageddon. So this brings in this gentleman, Father Robert, who worked with Darius. He's keeping an archive along with Darius, he's keeping the archive that Darius is kind of keeping that has a lot of old stuff. So we spent a lot of time in this episode with Duncan and Joe and Robert kind of going back and forth between the three of them, trying to discover the secret to destroying Aramon, and we get some more information along that goes. Joe starts to get attacked directly by Aramon as well. He shows up as James Horton. He causes the death of some Watchers and all that. And then Robert, his whole thing is that his brother... So Robert's a man of the cloth, and he very believes in Catholicism and all that stuff. And one of the things is that if you commit suicide, you're going to purgatory. I don't think you go to hell. Maybe you go to hell. I don't know. It's been a while since I was at Catholic Church. Like 40 years. So but his brother killed himself, and there's a whole thing about him and his brother receiving, being buried in a pauper's grave and all that stuff. And so Duncan comes to talk to him, and then between Robert, so the show jumps around a bit. We don't spend as much time with Duncan being hallucinated against by Ahriman, but a lot of time with Joe and Robert and how they have to overcome his hallucinations and decide that they want to fight him and that they want to, because the Ahriman's like the devil, right? And the funny thing is, I think I brought this up in previous videos. I think I brought it up in the last video. The Ahriman thing came up. Like, I was just like reading something about this guy Steiner, who's a theosophist, and he also started like the Waldorf schools. And he in this literature that I was like reading of his, not his, but like someone talking about him, they mention the whole thing with like his belief system and how he believed in like there's like the devil and there's Ahriman. So I guess Ahriman was like a real thing. It's not something made up by these Highlander people, the writers. I've never heard of this thing before. And I love occult literature, so I was like, oh, I've never heard of this before. This is funny. I bet it's in like a Final Fantasy game, and I just didn't put the connections together because they like to pull a lot from Western occultism and stuff. Same thing with Shin Megami, so it's probably in there as well. Anyway. So you can look that up if you're interested. But yeah, so Joe has a lot of issues with colleagues dying and dealing with like the consequences of James being killed and the guilt there. And then Father Robert and his whole struggle with like the church and his beliefs and the death of his brother, and a lot of temptation from both of them, or towards both of them, with like bringing back people to life, saving watchers, make sure people don't die. They go to like a grave at some point. They do a lot of research in like the catacombs here beneath the church, where they're storing a lot of these architect and all this stuff. And eventually it comes down to what they figure out between all this stuff is that the way to defeat Ahriman, the way to defeat true darkness is through love, right? And so then Duncan kind of figures out that he's got to like really Taoism this whole situation. he's got to enter like a mind space and fight Ahriman with a sword, of course. And a pretty epic sword fight at the end. But he can't hold malice in his heart against this guy. And so he's really got to like feel nothing towards him. Not fear, not anger. He's just got to like go take care of business, essentially. So he uses like all his like year of monk training and just his lifelong training and his like spirituality when it comes to like the Native American stuff from the first season to put himself in a space where he can confront Ahriman just as like in a calm, rational state. And there he's able to defeat him finally. And letting the series so he defeats, so let's see, I've written it down. He realizes brute force isn't going to work. Instead, he defeats Ahriman through the inner strength, faith, and peace of mind. Yep. So he spiritually defeats him by overcoming the temptations, despair, and all the illusions. And And so he does fight him like in his heart. It's pretty good. It's no joke. So that was fun. And now I think I didn't really watch season 6. I saw a couple episodes back in the day. Like I owned all this stuff, but I don't think I ever got around to like watching the whole thing, like sitting down. But I feel like it now is going to shift back to, it's going to be like, because this is almost as like the end of the show. There's a whole 10 episodes left in season 6 or 11. But I think from what I recall is that we get a bunch of kind of standalone episodes, and they really they're pushing like characters to like take over for Adrian Paul. But then after all this, and then do the side series with Amanda, and then we get the Methos Chronicles, and then we hit the movies pretty hard again before we get to like the cyberpunk cartoon, which let me tell you what, it's freaking delightful. But yeah, that's the end of the Ahriman saga. It was pretty good. I miss Richie Ryan already, but good stuff. All right. Yeah. So for the next episode, we deal a lot with the Warsaw Ghetto. Fun. So we start off, and Duncan's just chilling with this guy, George Thomas, who's a wealthy international banker or something. Anyway, he almost gets killed in a car explosion. Let's see. And so he starts investigating the situation. He finds this murderer lady, Alex Raven. And she is an old immortal. I think she said something about being 1,000 years old or something. Anyway, she works with this Max Liner guy. and the guy's trying to get the bank to return like a bunch of money to him, and it seems like they're the ones trying to kill him, but in reality he's not the one trying to kill him. In fact, at some point Raven is trying to, her name's Raven, right? Raven's trying to trying to protect him, because there's a whole thing where Thomas's father knew Duncan back in the day, and Duncan promised to like help his father, and then the father was going to like return money that he got from Jews who were in the ghetto, but then he got killed by his son, it seemed. And then now the son is trying to act like he's being persecuted or killed, when in reality he's trying to not give money back to the guy who deserves the money, which is the Max Slater guy. We also get like a previous flashback. And so this is one of those episodes where it's really focusing on the Alex Raven girl, because this is like the pilot to see if people like her enough that they'll want to make a whole show out of her. And so she ends up fighting with somebody at some point, like in a flashback and stuff. Anyway, it I don't want to say it's a thorough episode, but the whole gist is Duncan is not the main focus. It's Alex the main focus, and her relationship with this family, and how she tried to tell somebody she was immortal, and they like banished her essentially. And then she told some kid that she was immortal, and he believed her, and so she like watched over him and his family. And it's probably because of the concentration camp situation, where she protected this kid. The father died. And then she promised to take care of this kid, who ends up being the guy who's trying to get the money back for like all the Jewish families that got like robbed or whatever. And then the banker is pretending to be like wanting to be assassinated. Is pretending that he's going to get assassinated. In reality, he's just a big like a-hole, essentially. And so that's not fun for Duncan, who's trying to protect him from Raven. But then he ends up coming at and like shooting, and there's like a shootout or something. And there's a lot of playing this like funny game as well. And then Duncan tries to like hook up with Raven, but she's got like more important things to do, like not have sex with him. So yeah, so that's the episode. It's okay. The next episode 4, is much more interesting. It deals with so Duncan runs into like his old chum. Kingsley, I think is his name. He's like a lovable con artist. He runs scams. He's been running for centuries. And now he's finally found a woman he loves, and she knows he's immortal, and they're pulling like scams on people. So he pretends to be hit by like rich people, and then she like cries about it and says you need to take him to the hospital, and she's going to call the police to like get this whole thing. And the people like give them money, and they're like, tee hee. And then McLeod like runs into them as they're trying to pull like a scam, and they start chit-chatting about all the fun they're having. And Duncan and this guy's like really actually in love with this Molly lady, and then at some point they're like, we get some flashbacks of Duncan and this guy meeting, because it was something about like some dueling scam that Willie was like a part of, Kingsley was a part of in like the 1800s. And Duncan's like, I don't want to be part of this, but then he keeps helping out and stuff. And then I guess this girl is like super old, because I think they're in London, like earlier they're doing like a scam for insurance payouts and stuff as well. So they've been together for a minute. She doesn't look that old, but it makes it seem like they've been together for like 30, 40 years at some point. I was like, wait, did she say the 60s? Like it's like 90. She does not look older than like 30 or 40 years old. Anyway, the other big thing is like guilt and stuff. So Duncan is friends with a diplomat of some sort, an American diplomat. And so he's like chatting with him, and then Willie and Duncan track the car down. So then they try to pull into these scams, but the car like swings over and hits Molly instead and kills her because she's immortal. And so then Willie wants revenge, and he's super upset about that. And so they track down the car, and it belongs to this diplomat. And then Duncan's like, I know the diplomat. Let me talk to him. And he talks to some guy. It's like, no, I was with my mistress at the time. So like, I couldn't have been the one that killed the kid or whatever. And they're like, so what could that possibly mean, right? So Duncan investigates this further. So then we find out that the senator like investigates it further, and his son is actually like a drug addict and a real a-hole and doesn't appreciate like all the stuff that his father's done for him and whatnot. And he's a real failure. And so the guy calls him out and says, you have to confess or like something, and the kid's like, no, I've got diplomatic immunity, I'm not worried about it. And he's like, be gone, son. And so Duncan kind of finally figures out that it's the son who's the real problem. And so Duncan tells the senator or the diplomat that he needs to like confess or get his son. He needs to pay the price and all this stuff because the son's just gonna like nope back out to America and be like YOLO, whatever. And there's a whole thing about that where they like argue back and forth about like how he's a failure as a father because he's so much with the busy. And then he's up. I think he's up for senator. That's why I keep saying senator. Oh no, he's up for like a real diplomat position or something. Anyway, some crazy nonsense like that. But Kingsley pulls this whole scam to get into a situation where he can assassinate the diplomat, and then him and Duncan come at odds. Oh no! So before that, they like fight, and then hold on. No, they fight afterwards, and Duncan like beats the crap out of him. But he's like, "I'm not going to kill you, but this is like you better like leave this whole situation alone with the son or whatnot." And the guy's like, "We'll see about that." And then Duncan goes to get the son to like commit himself to admitting that what he did was wrong and stuff. And then yeah, and so then Duncan kind of like reflects on like the whole situation where his friend is like, we're done, I don't want to be with you, I don't want to be friends with you if you're not going to like take this stuff seriously and help me out with the stuff that I need. And the whole thing's kind of sad. The next episode it's another one of these ladies that's going to like be a pilot or whatever. It's Kira, that's her name. So it starts off, there's a woman in like an insane asylum, and this guy's going to go, take advantage of that situation because she's in there because I don't know if she's in an insane asylum. She's like in a psychiatric ward because she's like in a coma, or she's in like some sort of like real nasty situation where she's not speaking or moving or whatever, and they have to like hand feed her, and he's gonna like, she's hot, so there you go. And then these douchebags like show up and try to kill her, and then she like they kill like all the other nurses and stuff, and then she like wakes up, runs away, she like runs through Paris, she runs into like, she falls asleep like in her like crazy hospital gown, and some little girl's like, are you okay? You need to go home, you look sick. And it's like fair. And so they chit chat about all that fun stuff. And then let's see. Oh, and then at the same time, so the guy, there's another immortal named Milos something, Vladik, I think, and he sent the assassins to kill her because I think he's used her in the past, and part of the reason she's like all knocked out is because he drugged her up and has been drugging her up so that she'll like do stuff for him, because her whole thing is that for like 1,000 years she just like protects people and does like guard duty and stuff, and at some point she's like fighting off some French like musketeer style guys, and Duncan's there like watching, and then they like end up getting a room together by accident, or like he's like, well, I got a room. There's only room. There's no rooms left. And she's like, well, I'll split it with you. And he's like, okay, nothing's going to happen. And they get there and there's like one bed, and he's like, I'll just sleep on the floor. And she's like, get up here. Just don't do anything crazy. And then of course they do what they do. And so they have a little romance and stuff. And then eventually she just kind of like nopes out. Anyway, Duncan's trying to teach her that she's like an immortal and like all this stuff in the past and stuff. It talks about like a birthmark she has to like kind of convince her. Cause again, she's like lost all her memories. She was like amnesic, but also kind of like catatonic. And so she's trying to, Duncan's trying to help with that whole situation. And he's like trying to get her to fight and like wake up. And eventually she kind of like figures it out. And then she goes on like a revenge tour and like kills the guys who were trying to kill her at the beginning of the episode. And then she fights Vladik and kills him and, gets the quickening and all that stuff. And yeah, so she was cool. Like, again, we know, because it's the future, that eventually these people went with Amanda, which was the right choice in my personal opinion. So, this is kind of like nonsense. And it really, Duncan's like barely there. He's just there to like exist because of like, it's still the Highlander show. But there's a few of these that are just like, they're not that interesting because it's like they really heavily involve these other characters, and it's not Duncan focused, and there's no carry through. He's just kind of like tertiarily standing around while stuff's happening to other people. But there you go. So the next episode is it's pretty fun. It's also super ridiculous. So Duncan is hooking up with this chica, and they just got back from like the opera or something, and he's setting the mood, right? And I don't know who this girl is, and she's not important. But apparently he met her here in Paris and has wooed her. And then someone comes knocking on the door in his barge right before they're about to get the what is it, the beast with two backs going. And they kidnap her, and it's some goons. And so Duncan races after him, but they fire at him, and he jumps into the river. He then finds a little night piece, and he knows exactly what he needs to do. So he goes to this guy's place. I didn't catch his name because I didn't care. And this guy has like a whole crew of mercenaries that are going to hunt Duncan down in some sort of like whatever that book was I read when I was in like a middle school. The Greatest Games? Anyway, man is the greatest beast, or I don't know. Anyway, not important. But so you got like crazy American guy with shotgun. You got like, I think Italian guys with like dark shades and dark suits. There's a few of these like Goombas. And then the woman's being held captive. Duncan has to survive and rescue her. And then the guy, the immortal guy, heads off into like another room where there's like an autistic nerd who thinks this whole thing is some sort of like simulation experience where they're just like testing a new video game or like a concept. And so he's helping him, and it seems like he's just like watching him do stuff on camera. Like, and the nerd keeps like typing stuff out or pressing things, and I'm like, I don't think he's actually doing anything. Like, there's not traps or anything. And then we find out this immortal. We go back in time, and we see that he was some like a-hole nobleman, and that Duncan like ran into him right when he was getting killed by some other guy, and Duncan like buried him, and then all of a sudden he feels like not the quickening. He feels like the little like ooh, and the guy comes crawling out of his like shallow grave that Duncan drew him from. And he's like, oh great. And his whole conversation with this guy about how Connor taught him that he would be able to sense immortals even before they became immortals, but Duncan's still trying to figure it out. So this is like right when Duncan, like, he's super Scottish at this point with the kilt and everything, and he's still trying to figure out the whole immortal thing. And so he starts trying to teach this guy how to be an immortal, and the guy's like, no, I'm good. And then at some point, he's like, I'm just going to go back and get my lands, and this is awesome because then I can just like be an a-hole all the time and never die. And Duncan's like, no, there's rules and things you got to do. And plus there's a guy who knows you're dead. And the guy's like, I'll take care of that. So he goes, kills him, and then he comes back to Duncan. He's like, no, I have to kill you because then no one will know that I died. And so they fight, and then Duncan like kills him, but then gets like stabbed himself or like driven off by like another guy who's like, oh no, the Lord's dead. I must tell everyone. And so this guy has been holding a grudge for like 400 years against Duncan because he didn't allow him to be an immortal asshole back in the day and rule his kingdom as like a total jerkface. So that's kind of funny. So that's the point of this game. So then most of the episode is just Duncan being Solid Snake, it was great to see Duncan MacLeod's Solid Snake impression again, because we haven't seen that since like season 2, where he's just like sneaking around, setting traps, killing these dudes, like fighting these dudes. And eventually he rescues the girl and gets her into position and tracks down. And the whole time the nerd is just like, wow, what's going on? And eventually the nerd kind of figures out this is real because a police officer wanders into the building and the immortal guy goes to like kill him. But eventually Duncan tracks him down and is going to fight him. But then dun, 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 the girl was an assassin too. What? So she shoots him in the back. He jumps out the window into the lobby. And then the immortal guy kills her because she knows too much or something. Duncan then like wakes up, sneaks back off into like the computer room, talks to the autistic nerd, gets him to help him somehow like track down the Babeimmortal, who then they have a sword fight, and Duncan kills him pretty easily. And then, we get flash forward a little bit, and Duncan and the nerd are like talking about stuff, and the nerd's like, I didn't see nothing. And he's like, you bet you didn't see nothing. That's the episode. Good stuff. Episode 7 here, we get another wackadoo adventure. It's delightful, though. It's got Fitzcarranigan in it. The whole thing takes place in the 1920s, and there's no flashbacks. It's just a murder mystery, like, no joke. And it's super obvious, if you've ever seen a murder mystery involved in any of this stuff, that it's obviously the wife did it. But so Fitzcarranigan is living the high life. He's finally wealthy. He lives in a castle. He's got a beautiful wife who's a jazz singer. And he's got business partners. And they're all having, like, this big little presentation where he's playing clarinet and she's singing and they're doing jazz, and his business partners are just like rolling their eyes. And we find out that Fitz is like transferring all his wealth over to America, and that he's going to go over there and get a new head start in life and get out of jolly old England or whatever. And then he dies, right? So then Duncan has to come in the funeral, check it out. He speaks with Fitzcarn at the in like the greenhouse. And he's like, someone murdered me. I was like this close to having all my stuff transferred over to America. And if I had, I could have just left and not worried about any of this stuff. But someone killed me and I need you to figure it out. And so they go back and forth. And then we see that his wife is kind of a harlot. And so, it's like very obvious that she's somehow involved in like the murder scheme. And so Duncan gathers everybody up and is like, hey, so here's his will. I'm the executor of the will. You have to be here for 2 days or you're not going to be a part of like receiving any benefits from the will. And so they all stick around. And then it's just like wacky hijinks while Fitz is like hiding out, like being a ghost essentially in his own estate and like watching people. And Duncan's very poorly trying to figure out who killed him and whatnot. And then people keep dying, right? It's like Clue. And so then like one of the business partner dies. And then we see like the wife is like hooking up with this guy. And we find out that Fitzcarn was banging the maid, and the maid is hooking up with like the butler. And and so she's pregnant because she's like, oh, he gave me a baby, blah, blah, blah. And we know that mortals can't do babies. So it's like, what? And so he tells Fitz is like, oh, I knew she was shacking up with like the butler or whatever. And so people just keep ending up dead, like again and again, and Duncan's trying to get it down. And finally, it really obviously seems like it's the wife. But then they have a whole conversation about poisons, and like everybody spent some time in Brazil, and like they know all this stuff about different kind of poisons that like kill people with like the blow dart and everything. And she's very well versed in this, so again, it's very obviously her. But then they find her in bed after Duncan like accuses her, and she's dead. So it's like, oh no! And then we finally get to like the last guy who's left alive, and because another one of the guys died, now there's one left, and then he's trying to like get out of Dodge, but then Duncan confronts him, and he has a whole like suitcase full of gold trinkets and stuff, and so then he ties him up, calls the police, and then that guy gets killed, and Duncan's like, oh my gosh, what? He's trying to figure out what's going on, and Fitz like pretends to be his dad and shows up at some point, and then Duncan's like counting all the bodies and realizes that the wife, Julia, is it Julia? I think it's Juliet. Juliet's not there, and then she comes out and she's like, ta-da! And he's like, I used a poison that make your body like the Romeo and Juliet, right? Get it? It's because if you don't know, which I don't know, maybe you don't, Romeo and Juliet, there's a whole thing where they are star-crossed lovers, right? That's the whole premise. But then they want to take like a poison to pretend to be dead, or one of them takes a poison to pretend to be dead so that they can be free of like their restraints, and then they can be together. But then one of them takes a poison, think the other one's dead because like the message didn't get through because it didn't get passed along. And so then the other one has to kill themselves, right? So it's a whole it's a tragedy. That's the point. So she's using the same thing. She's pretending to be dead. Fitz is actually dead, but not really dead. And so anyway, so then there's a confrontation. She shoots Duncan and then shoots like the dad, who's actually Fitzcarn, and they both get up, and then they're like, I replaced the bullets in that gun with blanks. And she's like, oh no, how? And then, the police show up and they arrest her for being the criminal. And as she's like getting driven off in the paddy wagon, Fitz is like standing out there, just normal Fitz. And she's like, oh, he's alive, I see him, I see my dead husband, blah, 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 blah. And then he's like, ta. And he's like, I'm going to go to America and be rich. And Duncan's like just reading a newspaper. And he's like, I'm so excited, all my investments in America are going to be great. And then Duncan's like, you're broke. And he hands a newspaper and it's like, the Great Depression. And Fitz is like, no! And that ends that episode, which was freaking delightful. This next episode is another Babeimmortal. That's what Grok keeps telling me. I look up names and stuff. It's a Babeimmortal episode that stars Katie, something like that. Anyway, she's this immortal who is trying to kill this Argentinian newspaper owner guy because he killed her daughter. Now, immortals can't have daughters, so what's the story with that? Well, she tells us during this episode. She tells us that there's a like orphan girl who is like 6 years old sitting out some sort of gala in like, I'm assuming Argentina. The whole thing takes place in like Argentina, outside of like, obviously like they're in France. And so Katie sees this girl and decides to adopt her and then raises her and tells this whole story about how she was like, was having a child, because of her like feminine instincts or biology or whatever. It's like supreme, and that like as life went on, it was like she went from being like the mother to being the older sister to being the younger sister, right? And then we find out that eventually she married this guy, and then the guy shot her, and it's like, why did he shoot her? So Duncan, okay, so the episode starts, we see a woman like getting a crossbow, which is the excellent way to assassinate someone, by the way, with like a sniper rifle to kill this guy. And then Duncan like senses her because she's immortal, confronts her, she shoots him, they have like an argument, and then he goes to confront this guy, and this guy's like a fencer. He went to like fence with him for some reason. And Duncan's good at everything, so of course he was a good fencer against this trained fencer guy who was like in an amateur league. But so the fencing occurs. Okay. And so then he goes to warn this guy, and this guy's like, I barely know you, why would you do it? And he has a daughter named Mia, and then Mia's out in his like palatial estate, like wandering around throwing rocks in like ponds and stuff. And then the assassin lady shows up, and the girl sees her, and she's like, hey, Katie. And then Duncan gets like the story from this guy. He's like, oh no. So then Duncan gets kicked out of there. He runs in that lady again. He like sword fights with her a little bit. She has like some radical sword. It's super cool looking. Beats her obviously, but just lets her go and says, whatever. And then she like tells him the story, and And so he goes to confront the guy and asks him about the story, and then his version of the story is pretty much the same, except that so he married this woman, right? And so she's the mother of this girl. So Katie is like her grandmother, and he and then she got like bored, and so she started having sex with like this guy's like apprentice, or like the guy's he's grooming to take over his like business for him. And this guy's like a super hot Latino guy. And then there's she Katie found out because the guy like was flirting with Katie as well, and then the daughter got like super mad, and it's like, Mom, how could you? And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not interested in that guy. He's the one who's coming on to me. And then she's like, wait, are you sleeping with him? And she's like, don't tell me how to live my life. And it's like, bro, you're like a 50-year-old woman at this point. Like, like, what are you doing? Anyway. And then sorry. All right, and so then the guy gets like pictures because he's gonna go on like some trip around the world, and he gets some pictures and sees them together, and he goes back to the house to like be sad, and he hears them having sex. So he, in a fit of passionate rage, he goes and confronts them, and then shoots them both. Right, and then he gets off because in Argentina, I guess because it was a crime of passion, they're like YOLO. Sure, why not? So there's a whole thing about that, and then Duncan like brings it up to her, and then she's like, oh, he got the courts to get him off because of misogyny or something. I've had to deal with that before. And then she tells a story about how when she was a mortal, she had like fallen in love with like the king's son or something, and then the king's son was like in love with her, and how she wanted to they were going to get like married or something because the prince like convinced his father to let him do that, and then in reality he just brought her to trial and tried her as like a witch. And so and she's like, I'm not a witch. And the king like paid off all her friends and the people, like she was like a tavern wench or whatever. And so that she's like doesn't trust it, and then her and Duncan like have sex in a pretty it's like one of the most intimate scenes since like the first season. Like it was like it kind of dragged on, like sort of fast forwarding, and I was like, okay, I don't need to see this like mid woman from like the 90s having sex with like beautiful Adrian Paul, whatever. Anyway, again, it's a Babeimmortal episode, so Duncan's like barely in it. He's like just around getting information. So then there's like a confrontation at the house because she's gonna go kill this guy after Duncan tries to Buddha her not to, and he keeps wearing he's always wearing these like fancy ceremonial like Chinese robes or whatever and like sipping tea like freaking Confucius milk. And okay, so then Duncan confronts her again and is like, this is not going to fill the hole in your heart or whatever. And so she's like, whatever. So she goes and she fences this guy instead of shooting him, after taking out his bodyguards. And then Mia comes in and she's like, Papa. And then she's like, can't go through with killing him because Mia loves him. And then they like depart. And that's the episode. It's all right. All right, another Babeimmortal episode. So this one stars Reagan Cole. Reagan Cole is like a bounty hunter that's existed for like 500 years. When I looked up, she looked familiar, and I couldn't remember if I'd seen her in a previous episode. So when I looked her up on the wiki, it looks like they say something about her being trained by Amanda, but I don't remember them saying that in the episode. So maybe it was like a one-off thing they just kind of mentioned. Maybe it comes up later in Raven. I don't know. Anyway, those wikis are pretty autistic, so I believe it. Anyway, this episode we start off. We're in Miami, and there's like this gangster or drug trafficker or whatever who's watching some comedy show, and then there's like a striptease, and Reagan comes out and she's hot. So excellent choice. And she then goes to like arrest him, but then somebody shows up and like murders him, and she gets like a shot of him, and she's super pissed off because it's like the bounty was dead or alive for this guy. There was a show coming out around the same time that I had a buddy who watched. It was called like Bounty Hunter or something. Anyway, so and then this is like previous to like Dog the Bounty Hunter, which is what most people would be more familiar with. But okay. So she's going to take vacation. She heads off to Paris. She's talking to Duncan on the phone. Duncan's like barely in this thing. And then she witnesses this woman getting shot after she was taking pictures of this guy. So she goes and kind of like helps the police with that. Talks to this Interpol guy for a little bit. And then who seems super shady, but he's shady, but he's not like that shady. He's just like normal government shady, if you will. Like he's not working for this guy. So apparently this lady was taking pictures, and she took a picture of this guy who also was the guy who killed the person that she was trying to arrest in Miami, and he's like a terrorist, and he's for some reason he like is just doing petty crimes in Miami, and then like a week later, he's in Paris trying to like blow up like peace talks or terrorism talks for the European Union, which is now a thing, unfortunately. He failed at that because she stopped him because the European Union is terrible. Anyway, so she helps this guy out, and then they're having like a thing, and the goons that this guy sends out try to kill him, but she fights them off in pretty good scenes, right? And it's interesting because I'm watching some of these, and it's the whole thing that we're having issues with now, but there's a justification for it, so I'm less like concerned, because it's the whole thing where it's like, oh, here's like a 90-pound like woman beating up a bunch of like goons, right? But she's an immortal, and there's a whole quickening thing, and the show doesn't spend like a whole lot of time in it. It like casually mentions it several times, where it's like the more immortals you kill, the stronger you get, and the faster you get, and all this stuff. And we got like a little bit of that in like the first movie and the second movie, but after that, it's been kind of like hand wavy a little bit, because it's like, oh, this guy's been around for so long and he's killed so many immortals. He's so much stronger than Duncan MacLeod. And Duncan MacLeod just beats crap out of him because he's a Mary Sue. but still, it's like, yeah, all right, that's fair. Like a normal mortal human is going to have no chance to like fight off like a immortal woman or not. And like, she'd be like 5 feet tall and like 78 pounds, but she's killed a bunch of other immortals. She's got like all their skills and strength and powers and stuff, according to like the mysticism of the universe. So I'll allow it. Anyway, also she's hot, so fair enough. She's not my type. It's blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white chick, but still. Okay, so then eventually she takes this guy over to Duncan, so Duncan can help out, and then the shady Interpol guy keeps showing up to like, and he's always eating sandwiches and looking kind of like shady with his like typical 90s like bad guy kind of vibe, like the bald head, and like seems unconcerned and very bureaucratic and stuff. But he's not a bad guy. Him and Duncan have like a little conversation, and then we get like a short little flashback about when Duncan and her met. And she was pretending to be some Hungarian countess, and they were gonna like bang, and she tied his hands up, right, because of kinky stuff. And then like the guards showed up to like arrest him and cut off his head for like sleeping around with like the count's wife or something, some countess, some like an actual countess or princess or something. And so she saves him because they're obviously both immortal, and because she's a bit older than him. I think she's like 500 and something. Is he 500? No, because he was like 16 something, and I think she was like 14 something. So she's slightly older. Anyway, but so she saves him so he doesn't get his head cut off, because that was like the crime. He was going to get beheaded. So that's nice of her. And then they have like a little fling. Then, okay. And so Duncan goes off to talk to the Interpol person, and then he's gone for like the rest of the episode. So then she tries to go, there's like some shenanigans where they're trying to stalk this guy and figure out what's going on. And there's like a conference, and she's got to break into a conference. So she steals someone's ID by pretending that she's like checking IDs, and the ID is expired. It's very clever. It's the episode's pretty good. For like the Babeimmortal ones, it's like more interesting. At some point, this guy gets like a text, or he doesn't get a text. That's right. It's a pager. He gets a pager. We used to use pagers. I had a pager once. Pager is where you essentially text somebody. You just like, it's like a number, and then you go call it, or you could send like short little messages on occasion. I think the pager I had in high school was you could send like a brief message. You could like type it out, or I'm trying to remember how it worked. It's been like 35 years or something. Anyway, so we pick up. Oh, so he heads somewhere to like get ready for like another shoot, because he's trying to be a model. That's the whole thing with the camera stuff. And then she like realizes that he's back at his place, which is stupid. And so she runs over there, and he gets shot and killed by like this guy. At some point, there's the whole film thing. They figure out it's in the trash, because the lady was taking the pictures was like, oh, these aren't very good. We got to do this again. So she took the roll of film and just threw it away. And that's how they figure out it's this terrorist guy that she saw in Miami. And so somehow, and then she gets talking to like the Interpol guy again, and that we find out that he's just kind of like, he's more of just kind of like a bureaucratic dirtbag and not like a bad guy at all. And so then they decide to work together, and she figures out that because of like keeping like just seeing clues around the area and understanding this guy and his like motivation and stuff, and the reason why he doesn't want to be seen and yada yada yada, that he's going to go and like blow up this peace conference. So she runs over to stop him, and then she confronts him, and he's like, if you shoot me in the heart, it's somehow some magic 90s technology. If my heart stops, the bomb's going to go off. And she's like, well, if I shoot you in the head, there's 4 seconds before your heart stops. And he's like, what? So she shoots him in the head, grabs him, and like launches them both off like the side of this like into like the river there in Paris, or one of the rivers. And Paris has like 5 rivers, I think, or something. I'm not a Parisian fanatic or whatever. I barely know anything about France, but I do remember there's like 2 or 3 or 5 rivers or something, because Pittsburgh has 3 rivers and it's compared to that. If you're from the area, it got compared to it like one time, at least for me. Anyway, so they both go in the river and it explodes, and the Interpol guy's like, "Oh, that was too bad. That was a fun adventure. I guess we saved the day." Later on, she's just hanging out with Duncan, and she's like, I'll just hang low for a couple months or a year, and then I'll come up with a new identity and show up. And he's like, you okay with that? And she's like, yeah, whatever. And then they like, presumably like bang again. So fun times. So we're on, I think, the last of like the Babeimmortal episodes, and this one features zero Duncan MacLeod. It's just about this girl and her human lover, and they go out and like help people with like errors that have occurred or whatnot. And then they have this whole scheme where they like for free go rescue some lady who's been like kidnapped for some guy, and he wants to like pay him back, but they're like, no, we don't take any payments or whatever. We're just gonna help out and do stuff, right? So they're just like fixers of some sort. Anyway, they make love, and then they are chit-chatting about what to do next, and she's like, I gotta go take care of some immortal business. And he's like, oh, you and your immortal business, I have a lot of qualms about all this stuff that's going on. And she's like, well, deal with it. That happens a lot in this episode. I would have hated to watch this show, so I'm glad they went with Amanda. Even like Kiara or Reagan or somebody else would have been much better. Like I feel like this is hands down the worst subtle pilot for like a follow-on season, because it was just so boring. Anyway, so she has a real grudge with the flashback. Was cool. So we go back in time, and she's just like helping some healer lady in like London during like the Crusades, and then this guy shows up, and he's an immortal, and he wants to get everybody to go to the Crusades and give them all this money so that they can support the Crusades and tax people and whatnot. She calls him out, and they almost fight, but then she gets like shot in the back with a bow and arrow, crossbow or something. And there's this whole back and forth between the two of them, and then like they like burn this whole village down that she was like representing or like working for, because they like refuse to pay the tax for the crusade, and the guy wants to make a point for the king and tells the noble he better get like his act together and whatnot. And so she's held a grudge against this guy for like hundreds of years, right? So she finally tracked him down. Throughout time, she mentions to her boyfriend that he has continuously been involved like wars, like he's a war profiteer, right? And most recently, he's doing this whole thing where he's getting money for like starving children in Defer or something. It wasn't Africa. It wasn't like starving African children. It was starving like European children. So was it like the Baltic thing or something? I don't know. I think the Baltics. There was like the whole thing there. And so he's working with a bunch of nuns, and she challenges him, and then she gets like spoiled again to stopping him. And so then they finally have to the police get involved, because the police are trying to figure out what this guy is, but they've like gotten his like Swiss bank account somehow, and he only has like $6,000 there because he's holding like $3 million in like a Bible or something. Like completely ridiculous. And so finally she's able to like get him in a situation where he has to fight her, and then she fights him, and then she wins. And then her boyfriend is still like, I'm not super happy about this. And she's like, look, this is who I am. I can't change who I am. And like, you're either all in or all out. And he's like, fine, I guess I'm all in. It was like, that is the last we see of these people. I don't even remember their names. So thank goodness. Episode 11 is good. It's excellent. It's not a Babeimmortal one, but it also does not include Duncan MacLeod at all. It deals specifically with Joe Dawson and Methos' relationship, and then a relationship that Methos had with an immortal back when Methos was banging a slave girl in like the antebellum South, and then this other guy also was banging the same slave, or wanted to bang the same slave, and it caused some issues, and then because of that they had to fight. Also, Joe Dawson apparently has a kid that's the Watcher that she doesn't know, that we didn't know about, and so there's a lot of stuff going on. So we start off and we get this girl. She's watching what's this guy's name? I'm going to call him Blonde Guy because I can't remember. Anyway, Blonde Guy. And she sees him talking to Methos at some point. And this guy's kind of like a bad dude. He's just kind of a-hole. He's got like a little crew of goons and whatnot. And so she goes to Joe and calls him, talks about Methos being actually an immortal, like Adam or whatever, because so talking about that, talking about what's going on, and then Methos and this blonde-haired guy, like, they get into an argument, and then the guy's like, I want revenge, and the other guy's like, go F yourself, and stuff like that. So that's super fun. And Methos is like kind of trying to like dodge out of the way, or no, he doesn't want to like fight this guy or deal with him. But this other guy like he has figured out like the Watchers exist, and so when this lady he ends up capturing this girl who's Joe Dawson's like secret daughter, and using her as like leverage to get like the Watchers to bring him Methos or something. There's the like workaround to how this is all going to work out is kind of silly, because this guy must have like knowledge that Joe and Methos are like super best friends, and that Methos is going to help Joe out with this stuff. We get some flashbacks. Flashbacks are pretty good. They're just like Methos, and this black lady like being like, oh, we're in love, or we're gonna smooch and have sex and stuff, and then their guy like harassing slaves and being really mean to them, but then taking care of like this one slave, the girl slave, and then him finding out that Methos is like banging her, and him being super upset and like, I owed you and I saved you, and she's like, no, I'm an independent woman, and it's like, bro, like, sure. Anyway. It's like, man, you're lucky to be alive. Holy cow. Anyway, so the episode's pretty good. There's a whole scene. There's some like it's a lot of kind of like fun shenanigans between Methos and Joe. The two actors have really good chemistry, and I really enjoy them like doing stuff. Like they've run out of gas on the side of the road, and so they have to hitchhike, and Methos is having a hard time, and then Joe gets someone to like pick them up like immediately, and he's like, ta-da! And there's the whole thing with like, back in the day, Joe like banged this girl, and then she had a kid, and they decided that because of the Watcher thing and everything else, it was just better that she didn't know that she had a dad, which is always the stupidest thing ever, but it's fine. People are dumb. It's not unrealistic, because people make really stupid, idiotic decisions all the time. And so this like one idiotic decision is not any more idiotic than like what most people would do that are idiotic. Anyway, so eventually it comes to that Methos agrees to help Joe, and they go, and then the whole deal is that Joe is supposed to get Methos, bring him to this other guy, shoot him, and let him like cut his head off. But they just show up. And Joe's like, go F yourself. And Methos is like, I'm here, let's fight. And the guy's like, all right, you're a little bitch boy, so I'm going to beat you. And so Joe takes his daughter and goes off to like tell her about everything. And then they have like a nice heart to heart. She's like, I need some time to think about all this. And he's like, yeah, well, I'm always here. And she's like, thanks. And so she heads off, and then Methos fights this guy and kills the shit out of him. And then as he's like dying, he's like, I said I don't like to fight. I didn't say I was good at fight. I said I don't like to fight. I never said I wasn't good at fighting. Which is like, the show goes back and forth about whether Methos can actually fight or not, but he clearly can, because he kills this guy. And then him and Joe just like talk about how they're, oh, I never thought I'd be best friends with the Watcher. And then Joe's like, I never thought I'd be best friends with the Immortal. And it's like his two best friends are like two Immortals. Like, that's how it goes right now. But yeah, it was a fun episode. It's a super fun episode. More of this would be great. But yeah. So the final little arc here of Highlander is pretty interesting. It's like, It's a Wonderful Life, I think is what it's called. It's just like an old-timey Christmas movie about a guy who's going to kill himself, and then an angel comes and shows him what the world would be like without him, to help him appreciate himself and like his like contributions to the world or whatever. So we start off, and Duncan is banging Amanda so hard it's shaking the whole barge and causing like an earthquake. And so they chit-chat for a little bit after that, and then she heads out and gets kidnapped immediately by somebody. O'Rourke, I think is his name. And so Duncan freaks out, and he doesn't. I don't think he notices who it is at first, but then he finds this coin, and the coin is from like back in the like World War II, and there was like an Irish separatist movement that was like talking about allying with the Nazis because they hate the English so much and they want to be separated from them. And so this is like their opportunity. And O'Rourke is an immortal associate of Duncan who was like, you're Scottish, you should be on board with this 100%. And he was married to this like crazy lady with the crazy eyes. And then, so they set up a bomb in this pub where this guy like rats out people to like the British government, like rats out Irish people or something. And then they blow it up, and then him and Duncan like get into a quarrel. And then Duncan ends up getting him and his wife like arrested for causing the bomb attack or whatever. And so this is like revenge. Let's see, the 90s, 1940s, 30s, it'd be like 60 years later or whatever. So Duncan comes and finds Methos, who him and Methos are still kind of on the outs. So Methos is like, oh, hey, what's up? Right, they're both like very sour at each other. And then Joe's kind of in the middle. And so Duncan talks about the situation, that he needs to go find Amanda and rescue her, and about O'Rourke and stuff. And then Methos is like, well, I'll come with you. And he's like, what? And then he's like, it's not for you, mother effer. It's for Amanda. I always like that frail. What did he call her? I'm trying to remember. He called her something ridiculous. Anyway, so they head out, and they kind of discover where O'Rourke is at. Meanwhile, O'Rourke like comes and kidnaps Joe as well, and then Duncan gets word that Joe's kidnapped and Amanda's kidnapped, and this is where he needs to go. And so he heads out and he's like, adios and Methos, I'll see you on the other side because I'm going to die. And there's some hintings that Duncan's just kind of like tapped out with like the whole immortal business thing. Like he's tired. And so he's like ready to die and he's not going to let anyone else die because of him. Like he's still kind of all bothered. Because if you might have forgotten, because we've seen so many zany episodes this season and like random chick episodes and the one with Methos and Joe from like episode 11, like right before this episode. And so you may have forgotten that essentially in the Duncan timeline of things, like he killed Richie, fought Aramon, and then it's been like nothing since then. So this is like directly after that in this season. And so he's still dealing with like the death of Richie and all that stuff. So he heads off to meet O'Rourke, and he gets there and he gets O'Rourke and like, you know, a death grip, essentially, like he can just cut off his head, and they chat about his wife and chat about stuff that's going on, and then O'Rourke's men like come out with Joe and Amanda, and then they shoot Amanda, and he's like, cut off her head, unless like Duncan, you know, and then, you know, they'll be dead before Duncan can like kill him, and then, you know, Duncan can do what he wants at that point, I guess, but he got his revenge. As Duncan's like, no, a life for a life. You have to, if you swear to me not to hurt Amanda or Joe, I'll let you kill me. And so he's about to do that. He says goodbye to Joe, and Joe's like, what's the plan? He's like, I don't have a plan. And Joe's like, no, this can't be the end. And so Duncan like gets ready to get like killed. He's on his like Japanese honor kneeling stance when some mysterious person, obviously Methos, shows up and starts firing at dudes, including O'Rourke. And then Duncan gets shot by one of these guys and falls into like some train tracks, and he sees like a light, and he's like fading in out of consciousness. He's like thinking about being tired, he's thinking about Tessa and Richie and all that stuff, and then he wakes up and he's like in a different place, sort of. And then Fitzcarn's there, and Fitzcarn's talking about how God sent him to like help him appreciate like, his existence and understand that like Duncan may feel like he's fighting a losing battle, or it's just he's tired, y'all. But in reality, without him, like the world would be a much worse place. And so, you know, God needs him to keep going or something. And so then we go through like see what everyone's doing without him. And so the first person we visit is Amanda, and we see Amanda. She's looking fun as hell with like longer hair. Oh, it's so good. And she's like making out with some pool boy or something, and she's married, and her like human husband is stealing government bonds or something, which is like always a funny thing. I guess they're like untraceable and you can like sell them for a lot of money, but he's stealing like bonds for Amanda. And then he shows up, Amanda gets rid of like her pool boy, and then she's getting ready to like kill the husband and steal the money. And Duncan and Fitz are like watching this, like they're ghosts. But then Duncan's like, I have to stop this. And they just talk about how without Duncan as like a steadying figure in her life, she's just like a total psychopath. Like she's just like Black Widow's guys all the time, steals money, lives like however she wants. And the whole thing's like a complete disaster. And so he gets Fitz to let him like corporalize or whatever. So he goes out, stops Amanda from killing her husband, kind of. She like pulls a gun and shoots him anyway. And then like chit-chatting, and she's like confused about how he knows Rachel and all this stuff. And then this group of like dudes show up and like shoot them both. And then cut off her head. And it's dun dun dun. It's the Watchers under I forget this guy's name. Grayson? The guy, you know, the guy, God, what is his name? He's the dude from, you know, the second season who was like killing all the immortals. Who's like brother-in-law with Joe or whatever, or something like that. And we're like, wow, how's he going around just like blatantly killing immortals like this? And then Fitzcarn's like, let me show you Joe. And Joe's just like a homeless beggar on the street playing guitar for money. And we find out that without Duncan being there to inspire Joe to like do better, that he kind of let the Watcher organization like slip into like this other guy's, oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. What is this guy's name? This other guy's control. And because of that, he's been able to just like kill whoever he wants or whatever. And so Joe or Duncan goes and like berates him and tells him he needs to like do better. And because the Watchers are killing Watchers too, they're just like this guy's not letting anybody survive his like jihad against the immortals. And then he asks Joe about Richie, doesn't really get an answer about that. And finally, they like meander away from that whole situation after it kind of gets like crazy. And then they're standing on like a bridge, and Duncan and Fitzcarrald's like, "See, this is what happens when you're not alive. When there's no Duncan MacLeod that ever existed. Like, you're a lot more important than you think you are. Even if like people die around you, like the world is a better place, and the people who do survive are like better. And even when they're alive, they're better." And then we like glance over this bridge, and we see dun dun dun. It's Tessa. What? We haven't seen her since like, season 2. Crazy. Well, she showed up for that one like doppelganger episode. All right, so we pick up with Tessa's little side story situation. So Tessa is married to some rich guy, and she doesn't do art anymore. And she's got, it looked like she had kids for a second, but I don't think she does. Maybe she does. She was like hugging some kids, and Duncan was looking very like interested in going and talking to her. So he does go talk to her, and he lies and says that he was another student at like the academy where she went, and she's super excited to see him because he's like a handsome guy, and she's like, she doesn't have any more love essentially for her husband or whatever, who's just like very busy, always being gone and whatnot. And so Duncan, he meets the husband, and then he gets invited over for like a dinner, and so he goes to the dinner, and then the husband gets called away, and so Duncan like flirts with her and talks about how great at art she is and how she's never given up. And we find out from Fitzcarn that she didn't get like any support for her art projects, and so she doesn't do that. She does like other things or whatever. And so then after the husband leaves, I think she definitely is, because she mentions it. So then they bang, and then the next morning Tessa feels like super bad about the whole situation, and Duncan like goes off with Fitzcarn and feels bad for what he did as well. And Fitzcarn essentially is like, well, it's not real, so don't worry about it. But also, her loveless marriage is not his fault. Like, it's just like a byproduct. And then so finally we get to Richie. So what's Richie's deal? So Richie was just like off robbing stuff in like Mexico or whatever, and he got killed and woke up and didn't know what's going on. But eventually Methos found him. And what's Methos' story? Oh, actually we get Methos first. So Methos' story is that without the Watchers and Joe and Duncan and all that stuff, he had like a girlfriend, and like she knew that he was an immortal, but then like no one else did. But then the immortal, when the Watchers started killing immortals, they found him, and they didn't kill him, but they killed the girlfriend, and then he got saved by Kronos. And then so he decided he was going to go down the path of evil because there was no other choice, essentially. And so he joins up with the Horsemen, and they start putting that back together, and they start just killing Watchers and doing whatever crazy thing they're doing. And Methos finds Richie, and so then they train him to be a killer as well. And his first job is to go kill Joe. So he goes to kill Joe, and Joe kind of like talks him down, and he goes back and apologizes. And the Methos and Kronos are like, that's okay. And then they cut his head off. So that's that. Right. And so all this like tragedy and sadness and stuff because Duncan just couldn't exist or whatever kind of starts to really convince Duncan that like he needs to exist, and that his life actually matters, and that he's doing more good by being alive than bad. And this causes him to want to go back. So he goes back, and he wakes up, and then Joe and Amanda and Methos are all like okay in like in reality space. And then he goes to fight O'Rourke, and O'Rourke's like, we had a deal, and Duncan's like, fuck your deal. And so they fight, and he kills him and cuts off his head. And then he like gets with Amanda and like hugs it out. And she's like, I'm so glad you're here. And he's like, I'm glad I'm here too. And like, let's go, baby. And so then they head out, and then we get like the dun, 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 which we get occasionally, like, and we just get like flashback of like all the fun events, because this is the last episode, right? We're gonna do Raven next in 2 weeks, which is kind of Amanda's spin-off season, which she only got one before we hit the movies, and then the movies got Duncan again in them, at least for 1 or 2. Anyway, so we get like a nice little send-off to the series and wrap up the Highlander series, all 6 seasons. And it was excellent across the board. Like, again, there were some episodes that were like a little more meh, but generally, like, I highly recommend, definitely worth checking out this whole thing. And it started great, and it just kept hitting like cool stuff and interesting stuff and mysticism and magic. And this season was definitely the mixest bag of all mixed bags, because it was like a combination of like kind of wacky episode, like it essentially just wrapped itself up at the beginning with the Airmen, and then with this final thing with Duncan's like purpose to live, and then in between we got like a lot of just like random monster. It's like very much like season 1, which is like random adventures, and sometimes not even including Duncan. But it was a nice little wrap up for like the Methos Joe stuff, and then we didn't really get a wrap up of Amanda because we get that in the next season, somewhat. So, but yeah, very good, excellent, highly recommended this show. Maybe someday I'll pick up. I was thinking about the other show that I kind of liked around this era, which was Hercules. So maybe I'll grab that, and we can watch that next after all the Highlander stuff's done, which is still like months away because there's several movies and then the wacky like cyberpunk cartoon, which should be excellent. But yeah, go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.